Mishnah starts Chesam and Beis. We're going to start with the words Vaz the Rav Tamei. Yeah, let me go back and explain what's going on here. It's sort of in the middle. We said that it's possible to make dirt not mukta, according to Rabbi Yehuda. You can take a pile of dirt, bring it into your house, and say that although dirt really doesn't have a purpose, but I'm designating this dirt for a purpose. Maybe I'll use it to cover things that are dirty. Okay. The Gemara says if that's the case, then we have a problem with shech. The Mishnah says, the Beitza or Mishnah says you can't shech a kli on Yom Tov. Explanation is because it's unclear if you really need to cover the blood. If it would be a real animal, a real chiyuv, then the mitzvah would allow you to cover the blood on Yom Tov, even though you're using dirt. But a kli where it's not really sure if you need to cover the blood, so then you can't shech the kli on Yom Tov. And if you do shech, you don't cover the blood. You just leave it like that. The problem is that why is it giving me the clear, definitive ruling that you can't shech a kli when the truth is I could have had a pile of dirt in a bag in the corner and I could shech and use it to cover. If according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're always allowed to use designated dirt. The dirt doesn't come up to. Okay. We explained that he didn't have dirt. So we said, so then if he actually doesn't have dirt, then why? The Mishnah makes it look like there's a contrast between a kli and a real a chaya knife, that there's a real chiyuv. If he doesn't have dirt, then he can't shech the chaya knife either. So we went through all the possibilities of what's the issue with the kli. Well, he's going to be digging a hole. Well, so what? Chaya knife is also digging a hole. What about Katisha? He's grinding the dirt after he digs it up. It says, so by the chaya knife, he's also grinding. Where would the difference come in? So Rava said, we're talking about that there's Efer Kira. There's ashes in his oven. And ashes in the oven are considered designated. But what are they considered designated for? Only for a vadai, not for a suffix. In other words, for things that he definitely is going to use. So that's what the Efer Kira is there for. The dirt, the ashes in the stove, in the oven. But for something that's a suffix, he didn't really have his mind on that, and it's considered muktzah because he didn't designate it for use. It's sort of like designated out of use regarding that. So you can only use it for avada. Seems like it. It's interesting. When something becomes a keli, mamish a keli, then it becomes no difference. If I intended to use it for this or for that doesn't matter. I can even use a keli shemalach ne'leis or for a heter. I can use a hammer. But once it's a real keli, then you don't have this discussion. If we're talking about something that's not a keli, it really doesn't have a use. You're trying to give it a use. Then we say, well, what use did you give it? So it's a much lesser it's not really in use. You're trying to make it in use. Okay. Let's start with the words Vaz the Rav Tamei. It's Chesam and Beis. It's in my Gemara. It's a little over halfway from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the wide lines. 5 lines up from the wide lines. Vaz the Rav Tamei. Now, this answer that Rava just gave, that there's a distinction between something that definitely is a definite obligation to cover the blood versus a kvi, which is a suffix, and the ashes of the oven are only designated for a vadai. Rava follows his reasoning. Rava says, "Hichnis afa lachasis beitzaya, u'mat lachasis beidam tzipar. Dam tzipar asa lachasis beitzaya." Okay, I don't know if anyone remembers non-disposable diapers, but it was a big job. They had to pin. You had to close these cloth diapers, and then you had to wash them. So in the olden days, if they didn't even have the cloth diapers, the baby would run around and make a mess wherever he went. That's a big job. So the feces, the excrement would get on the floor. So so they had dirt to cover that over, and they would cover it over, and that would be okay. Rava says that if someone has a collection of dirt, a pile of dirt in his house, why did he bring it in? Because just in case the baby is going to make a mess, going to soil himself in the place. So we have the dirt there to cover the tzaya. Tzaya means excrement. So if you have that already designated, that dirt, then then you're allowed to cover the blood of a bird with that dirt. Now, it's understood like this, that I don't know if the baby's going to make a mess. I don't know. Maybe it's going to be outside and I don't need to cover it or whatever. But the bird, I knew I was going to need meat to eat. So that's a vadai. The tzaya is a suffix. So if I've designated it for a suffix, then it's good for the vadai also. But dam tzipar, if I've designated for the vadai, then asa l'chasis by tzaya. Then I can't use it to cover the tzaya because that was a suffix. I don't know if the baby's going to make a mess. That's not on a clock. It's not like exactly, this is what he's going to do. And maybe yes, maybe no. So it's considered a suffix. So it turns out that Rava holds that something that's designated for a vadai is not designated for a suffix. That fits with the Efer Kira, that you're allowed to shecht other animals and use the Efer Kira, but not a suffix, not a kvi. Nahar Baloi Amri, Rashi tells us from the Gemara Sanhedrin, is really Rami Bar Barivi, Rami Bar Baruchi. They came from, I guess, the city of Narbaloi. The Gemara Sanhedrin says, whenever it says Narbaloi Amri, it's referring to this rabbi. Afilu hichnes afalachas beidam tzipam matalachas beitzaya. Narbaloi says that a baby soiling himself is karav levadai. So therefore, if you collect the dirt to cover the tzipar, it's the same thing. It's going to happen. You're allowed to use it. It's considered karav. It's close enough that it's going to happen that it's considered designated for the vada. Okay. Amri b'marava. They said in Eretz Yisrael. Pligi bar Rav Yosef bar Chama bar Rav Zera. It's a machlekes. Va'amila Rabba Breder Rav Yosef bar Chama bar Rav Zera. Some say it's not Rav Yosef bar Chama. It's Rabba Breder Rav Yosef bar Chama. Rava. That may be Rava. I don't remember Rava's father's name. Chadamar Kvi Hareo Kitsaya. One of them said that a kvi, that animal, that's a questionable if it's domesticated or wild, it's a doubt, is the same as tzaya. What does that mean? Not to say it's not dirt. What it means is that it's the same status of doubt. Just like tzaya, just like a kvi is a real question, so also the baby soiling himself is a real question. Whatever the halacha is going to be by the kvi is going to be by the tzaya, or the opposite. One says no, a kvi is a real doubt. Tzaya is not a real doubt. It's karav levadai. It's probably going to happen. In other words, it's not a 50-50. It's a, I don't know, 75-25. Okay. Let it be settled that Rava is the one that says that tzaya is a real doubt. If the baby is going to soil himself, it's a 50-50. Because Rava told us before that if you took dirt into the house because you wanted to use it to cover the blood of a tzipor, you're not allowed to use it to cover tzaya. Why? Because that was a real doubt. Tzaya was a real doubt. You designated for a vadai, not for a doubt. You know what that tells me? That it has the same status as a kvi. Just like a kvi is a suffix, tzaya is a suffix. It's not a karav levadai tzaya. Okay. Fine. Explain. Rabbi's opinion of muktzah. I'm sorry?
But aren't these very different suffix? Like one is a suffix whether something's going to happen. One's a suffix of whether the animal is a behemoth or a chayim.
Yeah, I think that's exactly that is the comparison. It's a very different suffix, and that's what we're trying to say. That it has the same step. One is a suffix like bein hashmasha suffix, like no one knows what to do. You know, it's a suffix on the status, and this is a suffix of what? Well, we don't know what the future is, and we're saying that suffix is the same as same level of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You see, the kvi is the classic suffix. It's like a bein hashmasha. There's no answer to that. It's the kvi that doesn't have any answer. So also the tzayat doesn't have any answer. Okay. Rami Breder Rav Yeva Amar kvi hainu taima b'lei machasinon. He's going back to the Mishnah Brisa that said before that on Yom Tov you can't cover the blood if you shech the kvi. Yeah, we didn't know what a kvi is. Maybe it's a buffalo. This animal that could be domestic, could be wild. Why are you not allowed to cover the blood? So we said because it's muktzah. The dirt is muktzah regarding the Efer Kir is muktzah regarding a suffix. He has another answer. Rami Breder Rav Yeva, he says the reason is the problem is that you're allowed to eat the chalev of a wild animal. You don't have to remove the chalev from the deer. You're allowed to eat that. So it's only domesticated animals, cows and goats and sheep. You have to remove the chalev. So if we're going to allow you to cover the blood of a kvi on Yom Tov, you're going to say it's mamish a chaya. It's mamish a wild animal. We just covered the blood. Must be that the chalev is mutter. And we really need to be strict about the chalev. We have to be strict about everything. You have to consider it this, you have to consider it that. But we're going to think that it's a vadai, and it's going to be the chalev, and you're going to end up eating the chalev. So there's a gzeira there. The Gemara asks, Afila b'chol nami, you shouldn't cover the blood on the weekday also. So when they walk by the shlachtos, buy the piece of meat, they covered the blood. He's going to say, oh, yeah, it was a wild animal. And he's going to end up eating the chalev. So when he covers the blood during the weekday, we say he's just cleaning his courtyard. He doesn't want blood hanging around. So he covered it with dirt. And Yom Tov, it's different. On Yom Tov, why would he cover it? It must be that there's a halachic reason. The Gemara says, 1 second. Why are you allowed to cover the blood in the weekday if you shecht it into a garbage can? What are you trying to do? Clean the garbage can? There's no reason for you to do that. It must be that because it's a wild animal. A wild animal, you're allowed to eat the chalev. We should make a gzeira that you're never allowed to cover the blood of a kvi because of this gzeira. But let's say someone comes to ask the Rav, should I cover it? In other words, it's not just what he's doing. It's a real question. Should the blood be covered? We always said yes. Inami misafka amrile rabbanan zil tarach bekasi. Inami misfeka amrile rabbanan zil tarach bekasi. B'yamtiv im misfeka mi amrile rabbanan zil tarach bekasi. The way we're saying it's like this. During the weekday, someone will understand that he's not really doing it because it's an obligation. He'll understand that he's doing it misafek. But if he does it on Yom Tov, then it becomes clear that it's not a suffix here. It looks like it's a vadai. How's he allowed to do this? It must be that it's a vadai, and therefore you can eat the chalev. So the act of covering the blood on Yom Tov is more of a statement than covering the blood on the weekday. Tani Rab Zera. Rab Zera told like people it's not just a kvi, which is a suffix, which is, if it's a wild animal or not. But even if someone shechts a domesticated animal, a wild animal, and a bird, all is having a big feast. When the blood is all over on the floor, it's all mixed up. Also, you're not allowed to cover it on Yom Tov. Why? Because some of it is mutter and some of it is us. In other words, some of it has an obligation to cover and some doesn't. If it has an obligation, then you could cover it. If it doesn't, then you can't. Here you have a whole mix. Amar Rab Yesi bar Yasiniya. Okay. He said that every Masechta has one Tana or Amira that's not in no other Masechta. Yeah. Okay. I don't know Masechta, but I haven't come across it. So this was only taught if you can't cover it with one shovelful. But if one shovelful will cover everything, so then that same shovelful, then there's no problem. You can cover the blood because you're only doing one maisa and you're getting all the blood. Gemara says pshita. That seems quite obvious. Well, the Gemara says ma'adatema nigzar the kirachas have to stay the kirs. We're saying that maybe if we allow you to cover the blood when there's a mixture of blood, even with one shovelful, you may end up thinking that you're allowed to do it with two shovelfuls, which that becomes a real problem. The Gemara says, Kamash Malan, that there's no problem. One shovelful, yes, two shovelfuls, no. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, some say it's Rav. Shachat Tzipur Me'er of Yom Tov ein Mechasnei Sebi Yom Tov. There's a rule in Hilchas Yom Tov. Rabbeinu Chananel puts this on the bottom line of my Rabbeinu Chananel. You see Rabbeinu Chananel? Rabbeinu Chananel is a commentary that was before Rashi. Some of these things are very, very clear. Bottom line, he says, anything that you could have done before Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. Any malacha that could have been done before Yom Tov, that's a rule in Hilchas Yom Tov. That's why certain things you're allowed to crush on Yom Tov because fresh is better. But if you could have done it before, because there's no difference if it's before or now, then you're not allowed to. So what we have now is someone shechted a bird on Erev Yom Tov. Now he could have covered the blood Erev Yom Tov. So it says Rav or Rabbah that you're not allowed to cover it on Yom Tov. You could have done it before. There's no benefit of covering the blood on Yom Tov if you shechted before. What about Gilgalisa? You made a dough. You're allowed to make dough on Yom Tov. You're allowed to bake. Problem is, what about taking challah? Gilgalisa Me'er of Yom Tov. If you made the dough before Yom Tov, but you didn't take challah, mafresh mena chalasa be Yom Tov, you're allowed to take challah on Yom Tov. Now, how would you do it on Yom Tov itself? You would take challah. So, well, the same with the bird. If you shechted on Yom Tov, you would cover it. But we said that there's an issue, because if you do it before Yom Tov, you could have done it before Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov. So the same thing with the challah. You made the dough before Yom Tov. You shouldn't be allowed to take the challah on Yom Tov. Just like the bird, you weren't allowed to cover the blood. You could have done it before. You had to do it before. The issue here is that there's a rabbinic law that you're not allowed to take Shumas and Maestros on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Yeah, that's a rabbinic law. Yeah, it's like Masak and Kaylee or something. Okay. Avua de Shmuel, we're on the second line on test. Avua de Shmuel Amar, Afilu Gilgalisa Me'er of Yom Tov, Ein Mafresh Mimena Chalasa B'Yom Tov. Avua de Shmuel, Shmuel's father, that's his name. Shmuel's father, we don't have his actual name. He was a very important person. I think it was I don't remember. He's mentioned in the Gemara. Remember the Gemara where he left his wife for 12 months or something? Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. But the Gemara uses it that a father could return in the middle of somehow he came back in middle of or something. It was 12 months. The pregnancy was 12 months. Right. Okay, so Abu de Shmuel holds that you're not allowed to take challah from this dough that was made Erev Yom Tov. Avoid the Shmuel holds that if you make dough, if you make milchala and the bread on Yom Tov, you're allowed to pick challah, you're allowed to remove the handful. He just holds that if you did it Erev Yom Tov, you can't do it on Yom Tov. If you can't take it on Yom Tov, you should have done it before. The sages were mater you to make bread on Yom Tov and to take challah, but they never allowed you to make bread on Erev Yom Tov and take the challah on Yom Tov. The Gemara says, well, that's a bit of an issue because lema pliga de Shmuel adavur. Maybe Shmuel argues with his father. Let's take a look at what Shmuel says. Amar Shmuel, chalas chutz la'aretz eichel v'haylech v'achakach mafish. Shmuel is very lenient about chalas chutz la'aretz. He says that you can continue eating all the bread and you'll separate it later, which means that the separating, you leave over one loaf at the end, which means that separating is not really a maisa when it comes to chalas chutz la'aretz. There's no real tikkun here. You can eat without separating. You'll do it later. Just don't eat the whole thing. Just leave it over. If that's the case, then why should there be an issue of separating challah on dough that was made Erev Yom Tov? You're not really doing anything. There's nothing to do. It's not a real afrasha. Avur, the Shmuel says it's usher, and Shmuel makes it look like there's nothing happening. Amar Rava says it's not so. Shmuel's not saying that nothing's happening. He's telling you that you're allowed to do it like that. But once you designate it as challah, it's a real hafrasha. Kayinim are not allowed to eat it. It's not nothing. So Shmuel and his father could hold the same thing, that being mafresh challah for dough that was made out of Yom Tov would be usher. On Yom Tov, there is a real fixing. There is something that's taking place. Okay, we have a new Mishnah. Beishama is strict. Beishama says you're not allowed to take a ladder and put it up to the birdhouse, from one birdhouse to another birdhouse. Why? What are you doing? You're trying to get a bird because you want to shecht it for Yom Tov. So Beishama says, I know Yom Tov you want to eat and all of that. That's very important, but a ladder you can't move. If the ladder was there, fine, but you can't move the ladder. You can lean it from one. You see, in the birdhouse itself, they have different chaloin, different windows with different nests, where they can move it from one window to another. But you can't actually pick up the ladder and move it. You can lean it towards another nest. Basil Matir and Basil says no. It's very important to have meat on Yom Tov, to eat on Yom Tov. If you're allowed to move the ladder, what's the issue with the ladder? We'll see in the Gemara. Amar Rav Chanan Barami. Rav Chanan Barami says, Machlekes b'shus harabim. The machlekes is in a public area. Now, it's nothing to do with carrying. You're allowed to carry on Yom Tov. It's Yom Tov. Beishamai Savri, Beishamai holds, Haraya Imer Latiach Gaga Yitzarech. Problem is, in a public place, people are going to see, and it's going to be Marasayan. People are going to think that, why are you moving a ladder? You see, they used to have, they didn't have roofs that were, what's it called when it's on an angle? All the roofs are flat. The reason why is because they needed the area to use. They would sit on the roof, they would do things on the roof, so they need flat roofs. The problem is that it would rain and it would create puddles. You didn't want a puddle on your roof, it would start to drip in. So what they needed to do is they would put tar on top of the roof to protect it, and they would make the tar on a slight incline. Not that the roof was on an incline, but the tar would be on a slight incline that the rain should roll off. This was probably done regularly. So a ladder up to the roof meant that you were going to fix the tar. You were going to roll it out. People do that for their fancy the tennis courts. They get on their roller and make it flat. So they had to do that to their roof. So what is that? Yeah. Beishami Sabri Araya Merlatiach Gagutzar. Beishami is as a gzera that if you're going to do this in a public area, people think you're going to be moving out the roof. Beisil Samri Sheikh Mechiachalov. What? Beisil says there's no problem. There's a birdhouse right there. Everyone knows what you're doing. There's no Marasayan in that. In private area, no one's looking anyway. Then it's mutter. Kumar says, Aini, do you really make a distinction like this? Something that could be Marasayan, you're allowed to do it inside. Rav Yudah says in the name of Rav, you don't say that Marasayan is mutter when no one's looking. If it's Marasayan, we say you're not allowed to do it even in a closed area, even in a room inside another room. That's how they made the takanas of Marasayan. So the Gemara says Tanaihi. It's actually machlekes Tanai. The Tanya, it says in a Beitza Sheitchem b'chama v'lei k'neged. Someone's clothing got wet. He's allowed to take them off and let them dry. But he shouldn't do it in a public area. It looks like he just did laundry. Shouldn't hang it on the clothesline and pull it out. It should hang across the alley. Can't do that. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Shimon, those were friends. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, that is, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, two students of Rabbi Akiva. They forbid this. Even inside. Well, what comes out is the Tanakama holds that there's a difference between in public and in private. That means that Marasayan is only asur in public, according to the Tanakama. So you see, our Mishnah could follow the opinion of the Tanakama with the explanation of Rav Chanan Barami that the whole Isser is only in a public area. Yeah, and Rav would follow Rabbi Elazar, Reb Shimon. That's where he's going, where they hold that there's no difference between a public area and not. Ikadamri, Amar Rav Chanan Baram, Machlekes B'Shasayachad, the Bisham Yisud, the Rav Yudah Marav, Beisil, Leslie, the Rav Yudah Marav. Some wanted to learn it like this. Rav Chanan Barami is the one that made this distinction between a public area and a private area. He said that our Mishnah, the first way we learned it, our Mishnah is only in a public area. That's the whole problem. Ikadamri, there's some say that the machlekes is actually in Rosh Hashanah. Why should it be Asr in Rosh Hashanah? No one's looking. Well, if it's Asr in a public area, we just heard the opinion of Rav. Rav says anything that's Asr in public is Asr in private. So Beis Shammai that says it's Asr in the private area, that's the way he's translating it now, holds like Rav. And Beis Hillel doesn't hold of Rav. But everyone agrees in Rishus Rav and Asr. Now this is creating an issue. The way we're lining it up. Gemara says Lema Rav, Damar Beis Shammai comes out, according to Rav Chanan Barami, the way he's learning the Mishnah, that Rav follows Beis Shammai, where anything that's Asr in public is Asr in private. That's Beis Shammai's opinion. Gemara says Tanaihi. Rav Chanan Barami is only learning the pshat in this Mishnah according to a certain Tana. You don't have to learn this pshat in the Mishnah. According to the Tana that holds that things that are asur in public are mutter in private, so we can claim that this is the pshat. But Rav doesn't have to learn that pshat in the Mishnah. Rav could go like the other Tana, and he doesn't have to follow Rav Chanan Barami's explanation of the Mishnah. He could say that the Mishnah is following the Tanya Shveitzim B'chama V'lei K'neged Am Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon Naiser. Rav would be following Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon and saying that's the pshat in our Mishnah. And our Mishnah is not specifically in a Rosh Hashanah. It could be in a Rosh Hashanah. And there's a machlekes if it's us. Yeah.
The first subject is maybe somebody will see you.
Right.
The second subject is if you get your
Right.
Right.
Right. There was a tshuva from the Nachlas Tzvi, maybe the Pischei Tshuva wrote it also tshuva sefer, and there he made a distinction between if it's Maris Ayin because the Isser is Isser Deraisa, or if it's Maris Ayin on the Isser of Isser Derabana. It was Mechalik, that if there's no one there and it's Maris Ayin and Isser Derabana, then it's Mutter B'Chadri Chadar. It's Mutter if no one's watching. This whole statement of Rav is when the Isser would have been an Isser Deraisa. So over here he's flattening the roof. There's Maris Ayin that maybe he's flattening the roof. That's a Isser Deraisa on Yom. So then we say that Afilu B'Chadri Chadarim it's also. That's it's only be what's the origin, what's the sources. Okay, we're on Testament Beis. We start explaining what's going on in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that you're not allowed to move a ladder from one birdhouse to another birdhouse, according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says you are allowed. The Gemara now says, Masnisin Bleki Aitana. We have a brisa that says something similar but different. And our Mishnah obviously does not follow this brisa. The Tanya. Taught in a brisa, Amar Rab Shimon ben Elazar. Shimon ben Elazar says, Rab Shimon ben Elazar is a student of Reb Meir. Reb Meir is a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rab Shimon ben Elazar says the following. It says, Moinim Beis Shammai B'Sil Shemay Lichem Esasil Mishayvach L'Shayvach. Beis Shammai that's strict actually agrees that you're allowed to move the ladder to get to the bird cage. The whole problem is if you're allowed to move the ladder back. Because you need the bird, so you're allowed to move the ladder to get the bird because you want to shecht it. But when you're done, are you allowed to then take it back to its first place? So it says you're allowed to take it back. Now that doesn't fit with our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah said Meilichen. Emphasis on Meilichen. Meilichen means to take it. If it would have been according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, it should have said Machzirin. It's clear it doesn't fit with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is stricter. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, when were these words said? If the ladder is a birdcage ladder, but if it's a ladder that's meant for the attic, then for the loft, then everyone holds that it's forbidden. Now, it doesn't tell us any difference between the type of ladder, but apparently one was a ladder that was light, that you would actually move around. And one was a ladder that was probably more like a staircase. You know, they have like these big staircases that are on wheels. They roll. I don't remember what they use it for. Like in these big warehouses, they roll these things around. So if it's a ladder that looks like it's for the attic, for the loft, so then that's a problem. But Sulam Shal Shayvach, that's the machlek. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. I want to point out before we go further that when Rabbi Yehuda says Bamed Devarim Amurim, in what case were these words said? Is he arguing or is he explaining? The difference is, what does the Tanna Kama hold? Is the Tanna Kama going to be more lenient and say that even if it's for the attic as well, you're allowed to move a ladder like that according to Beis Hillel? Or does the Tanna Kama agree with him? And he's saying, I'm adding in this. No, there's actually a rule. We had it in Sachem or something. We had it in other places. Places discussed that, how's that going to fit with the following Gemara? We'll see. But anyway, there is a question. Rab Beitza Omer, Mateo Mechalein Lachalein. Rab Beitza says that you're allowed to lean it from one window to another window. You're allowed to, you can't really move it, but you can lean it over to another nest in the same birdcage. Others say in the name of Rab Beitza that you're allowed to make it hop, move it over a little bit, Okay. In these instances as well, we don't know what the Tanna Kama holds. Rab Beitza says, Mateo Mechalein Lachalein. What does that mean? I mean, what does the Tanna Kama hold? that you're allowed to do more than that. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Let's see the Gemara. Let's see in the Gemara. There's a lot of ambiguous things. B'nei Reb Chia nafak l'kraisa. The sons of Reb Chia, I think we know their names, Yehuda and Chizkiah. They went to see their fields in the villages. They had fields, they went to check. He also, when they returned, Amlu Avoin, the father, Reb Chia was an uncle of Rab. He was the editor of the Brises, a student of Rebbe. It was a very important Tana. Yeah. They returned to the father. The father says to them, "Klum ma'aseh bal yedchem." Do you have any stories to share? Anything happened? Amrulai, they said, "Sulam bal yadeinu v'tanu." Yeah, we have a story. We have a halacha that a case came before us while we were there. It was a case with a ladder. Turned out it was a ladder based on the way the Gemara is going to be explained. That it was a ladder that was for an attic. That's a problem according to Rabbi Yehuda. But we allowed it. Why? They allowed it because they understood that the Tanakama argues with Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda is one that's being stricter. When would we say that there's a machlekes is only by a ladder that goes to a bird cage, but not a ladder that goes to an attic? That was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. They were going not like Rabbi Yehuda, so they allowed it. Amar Lahem, he says to them, Tsuva Asr Mashi Tantem, go and forbid what you permitted. Inu Savar, they held, Midakam Rabbi Yehuda B'Sulm Shalali like Ligi. Since Rabbi Yehuda says that there's no machlekes about a ladder that goes to an attic, everyone is strict about that. Mechlal the Tanakama Savar Pligi. Then obviously the Tanakama holds that there is a machlekes about that. Excellent. We go like Beis Hillel, not like Beis Shammai. So according to the Tanakama, according to Beis Hillel, you're allowed to move a ladder that goes up to the attic. But the Reb Chia was held, v'loihi, but it's not so. Rabbi Yehuda, time of the Tanakama become mefarish. Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing on the Tanakama. He's explaining the Tanakama. The Tanakama agrees with him. I'll prove it to you. Says, Mimai, how do I know this? Says you're allowed to move the ladder from one bird cage to another cage. If it's talking about a ladder that doesn't belong to a bird cage anyway, the ladder belongs to an attic. You're saying you're allowed to move from one bird cage to another. It should have said you're allowed to move the ladder to the bird cage. Where was it before? It was up to the roof. It was to the loft. It's a good raya. Alalav hachikamer must be, the pshat is shel shevach in shel aliyah. The Tanakama holds you're only allowed to move a ladder from one bird cage to another. You're not. It's a certain type of ladder. Ve'idach, so it's a good raya. What did the sons of Reb Chia think? They said that there's a machlekes there, but if you look carefully, it's not a machlekes. They responded, Miktani sulam shel shevach. It doesn't say a ladder of a bird cage. Mi shevach l'shevach. It just says from one bird cage to another. Could have been that it was a ladder from the attic. Katani, that's what it says. Can move it from a ladder from an attic. I can move from one to another, to another, to another. That's the chiddush, that you're allowed to take as many birds as you want. So you're allowed to look for the bird you like. Okay. Ikadamri. There's another version of this story. Amrulai, they responded to Reb Chia. They went to the villages. They returned. Reb Chia said, anything happened? They say, yeah. This is not a ladder from an attic. Hitoi, sulam shalaliya balaya denavitarno. We said you're allowed to lean the ladder of an attic. We permitted that. In other words, people came to ask the Shaila on Yom Tov, you're allowed to move the ladder. We said you're allowed to lean it over, even though it's a ladder to the attic. Go out and correct your mistake. Go fix it up. It's actually not allowed. They understood that when Rabbi Yehuda says there's an issue of a ladder for an attic, only shevach, only a ladder of a shevach, but a ladder of an attic, of a loft, is prohibited, comes along Reb Daisa and says you're allowed to lean it from one to another. What is he permitting? The sons of Reb Chia said exactly what Reb Yehuda just forbade. Reb Daisa permits leaning it. So they passed him like Reb Daisa. But B'leihi, it's not so. That's not what Reb Daisa was saying. He wasn't permitting the moving of the leaning of an attic ladder. He was being extra strict on the Tanakama. The Tanakama says you're actually allowed to move it. And they said, Reb Daisa holds that you're not allowed to move it, you're only allowed to lean it. Not to move the base, you're allowed to move the top, to lean it over to another one. So both of these instances were a difference in understanding the Beitza, those ambiguous statements of the Beitza. There was a difference between Reb Chia and his sons, if they were being more strict or if they were arguing. Okay. Back in our Mishnah, it says that Beishamai holds you're not allowed to move the ladder from one bird house to another bird house. You're not allowed to on Yom Tov. We learned because there's an issue of people thinking that you may be fixing your roof. But you're allowed to lean it from one space in the bird cage to another space, another like window to a different nest, etc. And Beis Hillel permits it. Alma turns out Simchas Yom Tov Beishamai l'chomer Beis Hillel l'kula. Beishamai is a little bit strict over here. They're limiting me on the birds that I'm going to be able to eat on Yom Tov because I can't move the ladder. Beis Hillel says no, it's Yom Tov. You're allowed to move the ladder. Don't worry, I'm going to get the birds. Turns out that apparently Beishamai is not so concerned about Simchas Yom Tov, and Beis Hillel is. Beis Hillel makes leniencies because of Simchas Yom Tov. But we have a contradiction with this. The first Mishnah of our Masech. Beishamai says you're allowed to shecht on Yom Tov, and you'll take the dirt and you'll cover the blood. It's shechting a bird. Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to shecht the bird because how are you going to cover the blood? You can't take the dirt. Well, if you had the dirt before and then fine. Beis Hillel is strict about Simchas Yom Tov when it comes to. Beis Hillel doesn't give you a leniency saying, oh, Simchas Yom Tov is a leniency. So it's a contradiction. Beis Hillel seems to be strict, not lenient. Rabbi Yochanan says, you have to turn around what we just learned over here. But the one that we're going to turn around, at least according to Rashi, is that it's really Beis Hillel that's going to hold that you're not allowed to move the ladder, and Beishamai is going to hold that you are allowed to move the ladder. Why? Because Beishamai is lenient because of Simchas Yom Tov, and Beis Hillel is not lenient because of Simchas Yom Tov. The problem with this, and there's a taisvus about this, is that we're going to go through a bunch of Mishnayos now, and we're going to, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to switch around the opinions in each one of these Mishnayos. We're going to come out with Beishamai being lenient, which is very shocking because whenever Beishamai is lenient, it gets mentioned in Masechta Idiyos that we have exceptions to the rule of Beishamai being strict. Whatever the case is. The Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know? How do you know that there's really a contradiction here? We took like very general things. We said, we see that Beishamai is lenient because of Simchas Yom Tov in this case. We have another case, nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it also is Simchas Yom Tov. And over there, Beishamai is strict. So it must be that we have to switch the opinion. Well, how do you know it's Simchas Yom Tov that's the factor? Maybe Beishamai holds there's no problem with digging by over there, but he holds there's a problem of moving the ladder. It's not Simchas Yom Tov. It's the leniency of digging or of the dirt and the stringency of the ladder, and forget Simchas Yom Tov. How do you know that that there's really a contradiction here. Beis Shammai is actually consistent. Okay. Over there was a shovel already in the ground. In other words, their leniency was because of the shovel. The shovel was already in the ground, like we learned before. If the shovel was there, you're allowed to go ahead and shecht. You just pull the shovel out, and the dirt's already there. Dinami, you say the other way. Why was Bisil over here being lenient? Because they held that there was never an issue here. It wasn't Simchas Yom Tov that was coming to play. There's no problem because it's a bird cage. What's the problem of moving a ladder in a bird cage? Aval Hasam light, but over there's a problem of digging. We threw Simchas Yom Tov into it, and we made it into a contradiction, and really it has nothing to do with that. Ali Kasha, rather, if there's a question, we have another Mishnah or Beitza that's going to be the question. If you have birds before Yom Tov, you have to designate them if you're going to shech them. Now, Beis Shammai says the way you designate them is you have to actually go up and give it a little shake. So this is the bird that I'm going to shech. Beis says, no, you can stand down there and you point and you say, I'm going to take that one. It doesn't need a full designation where you lift it up and you do a whole ceremony. Alma Gabi Simchas Yom Tov Beis Shammai Lachum Beisil Lakula. You see, Beis Shammai is strict when it comes to Simchas Yom Tov. If you didn't do that shaking of the bird, you can't use it. And Beisil is lenient. Well, the problem is, it means, etc. We have a machlekes about shechting a bird on Yom Tov, where Beisil says you're not allowed to because you didn't have the dirt prepared. And over here we're saying Beisil says you're allowed to stand on the floor and just point and say, that's the one I'm going to take. It's a contradiction. Rabbi Yochanan says, well, you have to switch the opinions around. The Gemara says, how do you know the issue over here is Simchas Yom Tov and you're creating a contradiction? Maybe it has nothing to do with Simchas Yom Tov. It's over there they hold that there's no problem. That's why they were lenient, not because Simchas Yom Tov is so powerful. The reason over there was because the shovel was already in the ground and there's no malacha being done. They actually hold that it's forbidden if you're going to have to take the shovel and put it in the ground. Inami, or you can say the other way. Keeping the mukzahu. Beisil over here says that since it's mukza, it's an issue of mukza. There's no other issue. How do I get rid of mukza? I say that I'm going to use it. Aval Hassam, but over there, I can't just say I'm going to use it. I have to actually prepare the dirt, and there's a problem. If I didn't prepare the dirt, I can't use it. Okay. So we tried to make a contradiction, resolve the contradiction by changing the opinions, changing the actual text of the Breitzos, or the Mishnayos. Turns out there was no contradiction. Eli kasha. If you really have a question, the following is the question. There's something that's used to crush grain. It's like a pestle. Now it's a big block of wood. You could also use it as a cutting board to cut meat. Beis Shammai holds you're not allowed to move that because that's a keli that's used for crushing grain. You're not allowed to crush grain on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do the grinding. You're allowed to do the later malachas, not the early, not the planting and the watering and the harvesting and the grinding. You're allowed to do the kneading and the other one. Beisil matirin. Beisil says you're allowed to use that utensil. Beisil hold it's a keli shemalachta le'isr, but I'm allowed to use it. I'm allowed to use it for heta. Like a hammer, I'm allowed to use for to crack a nut, even though it's used for building. That's Beisil's opinion. Alma, but what just happened here is we had a machlekes Beis Shammai and Beisil on Yom Tov. If you're allowed to use this as a cutting board, Beisil was lenient. Alma gabi simchas Yom Tov Beis Shammai lechumra Beisil lekula. Okay, good. That's no problem. However, for a minya sheichet chayvayif Beis Shammai chulu. But we have our Mishnah where Beis Shammai was lenient and Beisil was strict, and it was both simchas Yom Tov. It's a contradiction. Rabbi Yochanan says, it's a big contradiction. We have to switch the name. Where it says mimai. Why is there such a big contradiction? There's actually nothing in common. Dilma loihi. It's not so. Over there, you had a shovel in the ground. Ella dikateres keli alav, aval hasam light. Over here, there's a special head. It has nothing to do with simchus yamtiv. Beis Hillel always holds it's permissible to take a keli shemalach le'isr. I can do it even on Shabbos. I can take a keli shemalach le'isr. It has nothing to do with simchus yamtiv. And the Beis Shammai has nothing to do with simchus yamtiv either. They hold that the shovel was in the ground. You're allowed to pull it out. Ella ikasha akasha. If you want to make a problem, the following will be a problem. Comes to leather. You can't spread the leather out on the floor where people are going to walk. The hide, it's the hide, because that's going to be part of the tanning process. They're going to be stepping on it. You can't move it because it's mukta, and you're not allowed to tan the leather on Yom Tov. However, if there's a kazayas basar, if there's still meat attached to that hide, then that makes the whole thing mutter, you're allowed to move it. Beis Hillel matir, and Beis Hillel says there's no problem anyway. Now, probably they wanted to sit on it, and Beis Hillel says, simchas yamtiv, you need a place to sit, you can sit on that hide. Alma gabi simchas yamtiv, b'sham elachum, Beis Hillel lekula, Beis Hillel is lenient when it comes to simchas yamtiv. B'ramini, ha'sheichet chayav b'yamtiv chulu. You have a contradiction. Beis Hillel is strict in simchas yamtiv when it comes to shechting a bird and covering the blood. Rabbi Yochanan machlatas hashita. Okay, we have to turn it around. Mimai. How do you know you have to turn it around? Maybe it has nothing to do with simchus yamtiv. Over there, there was no malacha at all. The shovel was in the ground already. Why is Beis Hillel lenient over here? They hold that this is something that we're going to be sitting on. They used to sit on their knees or fold their knees. I don't know. And they would sit on the floor. Simchus yamtiv. It's tzerich yamtiv. Aval hasam light, but over there it wasn't necessary. Over here, we're going to say it's not muktzah. Ela ikasha hakasha. We have another problem. If you want to create a problem, there is a shutter, a window shutter, that's pushed into the window of the stores. Now the question is, someone wants to come to the store on Shabbos, not to buy, but he's going to take something. And he'll pay after Yom Tov, he'll take it on credit. It's happened sometimes that if a bring and they run out of mashke. So you go to the store and the guy knows you every week. So are you allowed to take this shutter out of the door? Beis Hillel says yes. Shammai says no. The shutter out of the window. Beis Hillel says not only allowed to take it out, you're even allowed to return it, put it back afterwards. We see, Beis Shammai is strict and Beis Hillel is lenient. We have a contradiction, etc. You see, Beis Shammai is lenient, Beis Hillel is strict when it comes to simchus yamtiv. The Gemara says, Beis Shammai like kashas and dikadek over there. Over there, it's not a contradiction because there's no problem because the shovel was in the ground. Over here, it's prohibited. It's just to take the shutter out is sort of like building or destroying. Beis Hillel kash. Why does Beis Hillel allow it? It all has to do with simchas yamtiv. Beis Hillel was strict about they didn't use simchas yamtiv as a leniency over here. They're using simchas yamtiv as a leniency. Rabbi Yochanan machlatas hashita. You have to turn it around. The Gemara says 1 second. Bil malaihi or inami. Maybe it's not so. Ad kan lekam Beis Hillel hachal mishum dein binyan bekelim vein stira bekelim. Aval hasam lai. Maybe the reason why Beis Hillel is lenient here is because there's no malacha. They hold that there's no problem they hold this is considered binyan bekelim. Why would this be binyan bekelim?
Moving the shutter.
Yeah, moving the shutter is, they hold that there's no problem of binyan bekelim. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, they hold that's what it is. There's many versions of the Gemara that don't have this last piece. That's why there's no Rashi here. This last piece is not an old text. Okay, have a good Shabbos, everyone.
Good Shabbos.